Righty. G'day everyone. G'day from Australia. Thanks to a valued public servant from the city of Toronto for coming on board. The public service is a thankless job sometimes, and thank you for doing it. So,
Mhm.
hi, my name's George. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Noizend. We're on a mission to solve an issue that's hard to see but impossible to ignore. That's chronic low frequency noise. So, I mean, what do I mean by noise? And like noise is it's the sound of technology. It's essentially that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the sound of inverters, which are the electrical devices that convert DC to AC, and fans, which are used to cool those devices. If you think about large speakers, for example, they create noise. But then there's other things like HVACs, air conditioning. Might be a little bit different for you guys up in Toronto. You're more concerned with heating rooms up than keeping them cold. But it's also the sound of battery storage systems or generators or cars or aircraft, anything like that. But what do I mean by low frequency noise? So low frequency noise, for anyone here who's gotten into who's learned about hertz and is looking into it to that level, it's everything 200 hertz and under. That's what we're talking about. It's this low rumbling that you might feel rather than hear. Because of its long wavelengths, it doesn't dissipate like higher frequencies. It can travel through walls. It can travel over buildings. It's the amount of energy in these wavelengths. They just keep going. Higher frequencies, they'll sort of dissipate in the air and static out to everything. But lower frequencies, they just travel. I'm sure many of you have been subjected to that as well. I mean, Ingrid was talking to us about some boat parties that happen out on the harbor, lake on the lake. Sorry, living in Sydney, all I think of is harbor. Uh, out on the lake, traveling sometimes kilometers to your apartment blocks, or even out like coming out the kick drums out of a bar that decided not to close their doors. Even worse, they could close their doors and those low frequencies would just
Good
go
restaurant.
straight through it. Yeah. Um, but this is really what I mean when I'm talking about low frequency. And this is even a map from New York, which is showing the sound pressure volumes for transport around the areas and the airports in New York. I don't know whether this level of detail exists for Canada. It definitely doesn't for Australia. I think this is part of the EPA in the US where they put this data out. So noise is recognized as a global environmental crisis by the United Nations. This is a report done in 2022 talking about these emerging areas of environmental concern. This is obviously the main thing that everyone talks about is climate change in terms of temperature, but there are other things. There's the results of the increasing temperature in terms of fires. Living in Australia, you probably see it all over the news, the big fires. In fact, you guys having some now. Oh no, you were having some a little while ago. We're coming into our summer. We're about to have them. We've got a really good relationship where you send us your firefighters and we send ours to you, just rotating around the world. But when we're talking about noise, it really is an issue not just for people, but it's an issue for the environment as well. It's
Yeah.
an issue for animals. It's an issue for everyone. It's 22 million people in Europe suffer from chronic noise annoyance, and this problem isn't going to get better. It's going to get worse. As cities grow, noise pollution is identified as a top environmental risk. So let's get to the numbers. As I said before, 22 million people in Europe suffer from chronic noise annoyance. 12,000 people in Europe again suffer of premature death attributing to noise. In Australia, 31% of Australians experience high noise affecting mood, focus, and sleep. I imagine, considering how similar we are, that those numbers would be quite the same for Canada as well. And 26.8 billion projected loss in well-being and productivity. And that's not even accounting for any attempts to mitigate the noise. This is just people like yourselves distressed at home, unable to think about anything because it's so noisy, and unable to work from home because it's so noisy throughout the day, or unable to sleep and be able to be productive at work. And with in the West, we're having a really big problem with rapidly crashing productivity. I mean, there's a reason why why Elon and but I can't remember his name. The Trump has appointed the gov, Department of Government Efficiency in the US. It is a problem everywhere. And this, when it comes to the actual costs overall, all around the world, it's going above $500 billion. That's US as well. So that's a lot of money. This is this it's it's half the cost of Apple, and that's every year. But let's I mean, we can talk big numbers. We can talk really big numbers. But what we're really here to talk about is you guys, right? With how much is it how much is it costing you as a person in your home? So it's $2,000 a year per affected person in terms of health costs. That's not obvious. That's obviously not just you spending that. That's in terms of the cost to society. Productivity loss, as mentioned before, $1,500. Property devaluations, this would be a massive concern, especially in that woman who was speaking earlier about how people or businesses are moving out. The character of the area was meant to be sort of more gentrified and more refined, and now it's becoming a bit more uh, grungy and more of a younger demographic. And in terms of environmental impact, this in Australia, it's $2 million annually for local government projects to mitigate noise from projects to try and help the local animals and the live in their areas. So, I mean, what's the solution about this? When we're talking about low frequency noise, all of these traditional methods for dealing with high frequency noise, they don't work. But low frequency noise, our solution is active noise control. This is the same destructive interference that powers your noise cancelling headphones. It's effective where traditional barriers fail. It's essentially, if you can see from this diagram here, the way that sound works is it can either go one way or it can go the other. It's like a wave in space. This isn't a wave in terms of like moving particles over and over and over. It's the same particles oscillating. But if you oscillate the other way, that's the difference in the wave. And as we all learnt in primary school, 1 minus 1 equals 0. Well, close to 0. That's there's a little bit of a refinement there, and that's where we're making some pretty big strides. And the really interesting thing about this is it's actually physical waves canceling each other out, as opposed to some other technologies which use masking. There's a lot of this work that's done in corporate offices where they just add a very a low or even high level of white noise to the background in offices to make sure that people can't hear each other. So what does active noise control really look like? So this is an opening in a window with sound escaping from it. And you can see here on the right, that's the sound pressure level. So on the left, it's before ANC. On the right, it's after ANC. And you can see that there's already a massive reduction on this. And this is with traditional technologies. This isn't even with the technologies that we're looking into, well, that we're developing. Now, when I can't take all the credit for this idea, being one half of the founding team, but so my uncle and co-founder Paul Monstead here, when he pitched his idea to me, he had this idea for active noise control, and I was like, wait a second, because at that time I'd been learning about physics-informed neural networks, which are essentially ChatGPT with physics instead of words. And their ability to model and predict sound fields. And sound fields is just the fancy way of saying like the how sound is operating in a field, like kind of like this, but 3D. And then boutique digital twins, so essentially 3D models of spaces. Let's think The Sims, to make an active noise control solution for real world spaces. AirPods for buildings. I know that physics-informed neural networks is it's a big word to say. It's pretty jargon, so I thought I'd break it down for you a little bit. It's their AI models which integrate physical laws instead of words. So as I said, ChatGPT, but with physics, and they take the real world data and they use that as their training module and apply physics-based rules such as the Helmholtz equation, which identifies a point in a 3D space, what the frequency and the amplitude is at that space, and modeling it dynamically over time. And why it's revolutionary is the traditional processing methods. You had to brute force every calculation. You had to do it from second to second, and that would sometimes take minutes. But with physics-informed neural networks, we're able to predict that with much less data and have it happen dynamically, second to second. And what are digital twins? As I said before, think The Sims. For any of you who have played The Sims or SimCity or anything like that, it's a digital representation of a real world space. Again, it's about collecting data from the real world, the refraction, reflection, and absorption properties of objects, and the perimeter of that space. Sometimes outdoors, sometimes indoors. And then we're able to use that to test and optimize the anti-noise waves that we're trying to put out. And it's really revolutionary because it's speeding up the process. It's enabling us to say, okay, I have a precise model here, which I can test over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and then come up with a solution that will happen where I only need a small amount of data to activate that active noise, anti-noise wave. So that's our solution. It's a system. It's not just a single thing that you put on a wall. We've got some competitors who are thinking about putting them on frames in windows, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about having a whole system on a home or a business and stopping noise getting in or getting out. It's AI optimized multi-channels, so speakers on walls, Internet of Things sensors around the space to verify the data that we're collecting, the digital twin and edge processing. Think like a little sort of computer will be attached to your Wi-Fi router, and anti-noise generated by those panels.
Speakers.
Yeah, speakers. Sorry, we're still oscillating between the two. They'll look like panels. Essentially, they won't just look like raw technology on your walls where they'll look nice, they'll look aesthetic, where it's we're still trying to work that out of like what's the best way to deploy that. So this system is essentially a system of 4 steps where it's the discovery stage, where a 3D model is created of a home or of a business that's creating a lot of noise, and then sensors to measure that noise and create a profile. Then that data is used in the cloud with our proprietary algorithm to create that to create the optimal anti-noise waves that we need for that space. And then an installation step where our predictive model will tell us, okay, here's the problem areas, here's where we need to place the speakers. And then a subscription stage where we're looking at about 20 dB noise reduction. I mean, and that's it's if you're looking to noise, then that's a lot. In fact, actually, I've got a slide here. Oh, I do have a slide here. Okay, so here's an example
Here's
of
one
what
I prepared earlier.
Yeah, let me just get that out of the oven. So this is the sounds that you're experiencing. So for example, earlier, as I said, that 110 dB coming out of a nightclub. Battery energy storage systems are 90, and city traffic is 75. And all of these are 1 meter away. So obviously, due to the inverse square law, sound gets lower and lower the further you are away. So if we're able to reduce it by 20, that will by reduce it by 20 dB, the odds of it getting to a nearby home become less and less, especially if the shield is deployed on both ends. And obviously, you can see here that there's a safe and a harmful side of the levels of noise. from 1 meter away. So here's a really big, complicated slide on how it works. I mean, if anyone's interested in looking to this and reading more into it, you just talk to me and I'll explain it to you. Yeah, but it's just sort of to show you that, all right, so this is where it all comes out. So here's the information that we're receiving. Here's sound profile, sensors, etc. Oh wait, no, you can't see my cursor, can you? No. All right, never mind. All right. So, and we're not just talking about homes and nightclubs. We're talking about transport noise barriers on the edge of highways. We're talking about hotel rooms. We're talking about factories. We're talking about construction sites. These are all heavy noise making industries and businesses and residents and people impacted by noise all around the world. Noise making businesses generate $103 billion every hour. So this isn't just a thing that we're running against in terms of like, how do we optimize for health? It's also, how do we bring business along for that journey to say, okay, this isn't just about saying you can't do what you want to do, which is make money. And this is trying to say, hey, you can make money, but then also you don't have to impact people's lives. That's that marriage that we're trying to get to here. And that's why, for example, actually, no, I'll get to that a bit later. So what are the technology alternatives? Earplugs. I mean, I don't know how many of you want to put your earplugs in every night, and especially when it's low frequency and just gonna go straight through your chest anyway. There's insulation, which is also similarly ineffective. You just jam walls with insulation or double glazing and hope for the best, and then the low frequency just goes straight through it anyway. There's sound masking, as I talked about before, in terms of putting in a white noise over the top. But I don't know how many of you want to add noise to your apartments. I mean, you might sleep with a white noise with white noise. I don't know. There's also compliance, which is something that I think many of you are looking into. But that reduces economic activity and it decreases social harmony. And I can say that with a reasonable degree of certainty coming from Sydney. We had lockout laws put in, I think it was 10 years ago now. And our CBD is now mostly non-functional. You couldn't go out after 11 o'clock after going to see Wicked or anything like that. That was it. So I went with my parents to a show, and they're like, "Oh, hey, let's go for a nightcap," and everything was closed on a Thursday night. It's sometimes these things can go too far the other way. That's why I care so much about this. I care about it because I know that technology can solve this. Technology can make it so that we can come together, make money, and live. They're not mutually exclusive. So where we're at, we have an alpha demonstration of our software and a lab demonstration. We've received funds and grants from angel investors and governments, and we've got a distributor on board. So you can see here that this is a hemianechoic chamber at UTS. That just means not many reflections. There's minimal reflections with our primary source, our secondary source, and the error microphone. So the error microphone, even with that 1 meter distance, is picking up 20 dB reduced noise. Also knows 2 meters from the primary source to the secondary source and 1 meter from the secondary source to the error microphone. And then on the right here, you can see the software. This is the first version of the software that we've got running at the moment. It's a bit ugly, but you can see that the physics-informed neural network is operating and is predicting the sound without actually having to measure it computationally second to second. These are the grants we've received. We've been recognized as an impact investment by Autodesk Technologies. So impact means that there's a social and environmental good behind it. We have a distributor who has clients such as Disney and Dolby. They've got 35 years in critical listening, multimedia, and immersive audio installations, and they're really interested. They just wanted to get on board. We don't have anything for them to sell quite yet, but they're just like, wait, we want to sign an MOU, memorandum of understanding. So this is Paul and I. He's a lawyer with years in startups. And and I have a Bachelor of Sound and Music Design. I was a musician for a few years, and then, funnily enough, because of those lockout laws, got out of being a musician and got into startups. And so this is our team. I'm very lucky to have my mum, who is a quite successful businesswoman in her own right in the renewable sector, as an advisor. We also have people from universities and from nightlife venues and AI experts and banks involved in our team. These are a few people in our network. The Smart Energy Council in Australia, City of Sydney. We're a member of NVIDIA's Inception Startups program, and we've received governments from the state of New South Wales. So the final point I want to get to here is what is your idea of a fully functioning society? What is your dream of utopia? Is it one that's filled with the sound of trucks, with the sound of aircraft, with the sound of nightclubs late at night? Or is it everyone being liberated with the noise environment that they desire in that moment? Whose dream of utopia is filled with noise? Thanks very much for listening. Happy to take some questions.
Thanks, George.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, let's go for some questions. I think that what I can cover, some of these people have heard before or know very well. So let's use the hands up function. There we go. So Harris, I figured you would have some questions, so I'm going to ask you to unmute. Go right ahead.
When is this live? I'm tired of being bullied by the city of Toronto and Live Nation, having to listen to Subbase in my home throughout my entire home.
So when is it?
Idea is generally to like open up the regulation so there is no regulations for these types of venues.
So when is the technology going to be available?
Correct.
So we're looking to get it deployed onto our first target market, which is battery energy storage systems within 18 months. And then we're targeting that because it's a bit of an easier solution to get to. It's one we can really sink our teeth into. It's just they sit there and all we have to do is create the profile and it's relatively repeatable. But when it comes to live music venues, that's a bit more complicated, but that is our next target market. In fact, we've got grants for doing that to target them. So I think based on our current trajectory, I would look 2 to 3 years.
Oh, we can't wait that long. We can't wait that long, man. I'm just kidding. Thank you. Thank you. Leo, I see that you put your hand up, please. Let me see.
I think you've already answered some of my questions, because from what I've read beforehand, it sounds like you have the system in place in order to deal with steady sounds, lower frequencies, etc., which is excellent in my mind. But it's the variable sounds with the various different frequencies that is going to be the struggle. And I was always wondering whether, I never thought of AI, but you probably need even faster computers that are available right now, because even if you're predicting it, you're still going to have a lot of challenges, especially if you're looking at 20 dB reduction. But and I guess you're looking at 2-3 years. Do you actually feel it's going to be viable in order to, I guess, you install a system in a room? Okay, let me just, so I can envision what's going on here. You install a system in my room because I'm tired of having my neighbors playing that music and I hate that music. So I install this in my room, and what I want is to negative sound, and they're playing their music. Computer, your system picks up the sounds, produces negative waves. But can I still walk around my room and still have continual negativity? Because that's going to be brilliant if you can get to that.
Yeah, so it's a great question that you have about the ability to process it fast enough, and then there's the last bit about localization of sound control. So yes, we know that that's the main game, is having dynamic response to noise, and being able to create this predictive model over time. That's what we're working on. That's a real sort of the crux of the matter. That's our main point of difference. It's the point of difference between Siri and ChatGPT, to give you an analogy. It's once we get that predictive model down, it's lightning fast. I don't know how many of you know this, but ChatGPT, if you use it, how it writes it out progressively over time, that's for usability. It doesn't need that. It does it just because people found it odd to have it just flash in front of you. It's very, very fast. it's a false I can't remember what the word is, but it's a false defect. And then talking about the locality of the noise, that is something that people have raised with us a lot. And it's if you're adding pressure into a space, so for example, if you're like to enclose a room, you guys have really great at this actually, how you have that the insulation test to make sure the smoke doesn't get out. We don't have that in Australia. We're just like our houses are leaky.
Where the fire's outside.
Yeah. So you're not adding pressure into a room by adding more air. The air is the same amount that's in there. It's just the vibrations that are rotating. And if you get to those vibrations in an optimum way, which is what we're planning to do through the optimum placement of the speakers, then you're able to address that noise and cancel it in that space. Where obviously obviously your concerns are right. It's that sometimes there is a risk of just adding noise to a space, but that's why the digital twins are really the answer to that. It's about understanding that, okay, all right, so we need to make it so that, okay, maybe we need 2 panels on this wall to cancel out the noise, or maybe we only need 1. It's about having those refractions and reflections in place to understand that this is the optimum placement.
Okay, and a further question. I'm sorry for taking this up.
All good.
In an open environment, let's say there's a concert that's ongoing, and let's say they put an array, the speakers are all around the audience. The audience, you can blow their brains out. Okay, that's their choice to be in that environment. But is there a way, could the technology have your speakers on the flip side negating anything that comes out, so their neighbors hear nothing, but people on the inside to get their brains blown up by the music? Do you think
Yes,
that's possible?
Yeah, that is possible. In fact, that specific technology already exists, because it's very easy to have an inverse wave put out by the same device. So there is actually a lot of speakers that will have an like active noise control at the back. Those do exist, but what you're talking about is the sort of not where the speakers are, but the other end.
Mm-hmm.
So at the other end of the dance floor or the festival, having our system deployed there. In fact, we've got a good research proposal out with our university research partner to create essentially it looks like a net. It will be using our technology in boxes and using metamaterials, which are just highly advanced, highly engineered, essentially crystalline structure materials to absorb the higher frequencies and dissipate them.
And the lower frequencies as well?
Yeah, the
High
lower
active
frequencies
noise
will be our
control.
technology. Yeah. So it'll be a bit bulkier than a net, but that's the idea for now. Everything's it's an exciting new area because all of this technology, these physics informed neural networks, it's cutting edge. It's stuff that was only just coming out in the last couple of years. All of the papers talking about it are just the last couple of years. Jensen Huang is talking about it. So the founder of NVIDIA was talking about it just recently, as 4 months ago. This is, it's exciting. It's very exciting. I'm thrilled to be working in this space. I wish we had this 15 years ago.
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled to be following this information, to be honest.
Yeah,
So
and
the AI will have some self-learning as well, which is why you have the mapping and then you have the analysis, and particularly something where it's not so much music, but if you think like go back to the battery energy storage system, the BESS systems, they're going to have a regularity of what they're doing, and therefore the system can have a self-learning component to do with the regularity of that particular noise.
Yeah.
And I suspect when you go to things like construction noise and those sort of things, they again will have a regularity. You know, this is the And funny enough, I had to go to a meeting in Sydney City last week, and they've got a couple of big constructions right on the waterfront at the moment, and the noise was quite. This is from building, offices and apartments right on Sydney Harbour, and we had 2 cement trucks together. God, they were noisy. But it's the same sound. So, for example, you could have, if you think of a construction site, and just think of the building. So you're going up in like level 10, right? You have a safety fence. We have safety fences, not like other places, around the outside. You have the panels, the Noizend shield panels around the outside of the safety fence, stopping the noise getting out, not only down to the ground, but also to neighbouring offices and hotels and apartments. And those sort of things is where the self-learning comes in, because there is a regularity for a lot of noise, isn't there, George?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
exactly.
this is absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I'm
Ingrid.
just gonna have to. I just have to
Well-
give my apologies. I've got to go to an appointment. I've a medical
Okay.
appointment with my dad. But thank you so
Okay.
much, everyone. I'd love to receive any questions. I'm sure Ingrid will pass around our emails. If you
Absolutely.
want to have if you even want to have a Zoom, I'd love to have another one. Yeah, but
Yeah.
great apologies. Have a great night, everyone.
The meeting's going to continue, everyone. George is just heading off, so don't.
Okay, thanks,
I don't want to
George.
lose everyone here. Thanks, George.
Just on that, our website noizend.com has a survey form, very simple. What noise are you interested in, with contact details? And maybe that's the easiest way to get and contact us, is just to fill that in, and then we can keep you up to date how we're going.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
not an extensive survey. We're also part of the Australian government, the Senate. We have a 2-party system, as you do. The Senate has a current inquiry on aircraft noise, because a number of our airports, increasing number of airports, are 24/7. So
Yep.
Melbourne Airport's 24/7, Brisbane Airport's 24/7. Sydney's getting a new second airport, finally. It's only taken 30 years. It's going to be 24/7. And Melbourne and Brisbane are putting in an extra 3rd runway. So they're sort of increasing their capacity by a 1/3. So that there's a very active noise group around Brisbane because of the noise 24/7 complaint. And they've got a lot of complaints about noise. And they've got a very extensive survey about how to, 86% of applicants says their sleep's affected, and their stress levels and mental health and those sort of things. So yeah, we've got a very simple survey which just says, who are you? You'd like to stay on our mailing list, and which particular noise is upsetting you? Is it aircraft noise? Is it music noise? Is it people talking too much? We can't answer that one.
Yeah, well, thank you.
No politicians. Okay, it's not the politicians talking.
Wondering if anybody else has any questions. Feel free to put your hand up. So one of the things that I was really wondering about is so what we have coming up here is a lot of outdoor patios. And now we've got, like, that's where something I think that COVID really started to increase the number of patios, because there's more ventilation, people feel safer. And now we've got these lovely heating vents. So you can, I mean, we're not in winter 12 months of the year. We actually really only have winter about 4, but there's those bridge months of about 2 on either side, where some people want to stay outside. Maybe it's because they can smoke out there or something like that. So how would this technology work in an environment like that? Because I have a feeling that Melissa, she was talking about the King and Portland area. And so you've got a patio on a 2nd or 3rd floor of a building, and then you've got residences all the way around that. So what would be the technology? How would your technology work for that?
Well, the interesting, it's still the same thing. You need to do a digital twin of the space. And the interesting thing is that NVIDIA in Taiwan for typhoon and hurricane mapping is doing outdoor mapping to a really high level. So, and we're part of their startup hub, and we get access to some of their stuff for free because we're an innovative company using AI. So that you'd still have to analyze the space, and then you would probably end up having the panels around the outside to stop the noise escaping. So there's
But
sort
does
of
that
two.
work vertically? Does that work so you can have them this way, but do you have to have a panel
Yeah, because
above?
the speakers would go upward as well. That's a matter of how you analyze it. And we're not
Okay.
haven't done it yet. But the thing,
Yeah.
the idea is that there's two levels. We're starting with trying to stop noise getting out of a confined space, which obviously is walls largely, right?
Walls and ceilings.
Yeah, walls and ceilings. Then you've got getting noise coming out of a space that may not have a physical barrier. But as the long sound waves are not really affected by walls anyway, you can see conceptually it isn't that much of a difference
Ah, okay.
to do it, because the long waves are going to go through regardless, right? So if you can
Right.
stop the long waves going out, then you're going to stop the long waves going out. And then
Mhm.
obviously the third one, which is where we've got the university grants down the track, and what George was talking about is stopping noise coming into spaces, either by putting in barriers around along roads and railways and airports, or just putting them on the outside of your house or on your roof for aircraft noise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In your roof, and stopping the noise coming in. And that's an
Yeah.
obviously more complex problem. So it's sort of, we're stopping and getting out first. Simple applications like BESS or air conditioning units, or something which has a regularity, to more complex sounds, to then a more open space, and then the big open
Yeah.
where.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
the chain of
Development.
technology development we're doing.
Good. Okay, Melissa's got her hand up. Melissa, please join.
Thank you. Well, I'm really amazed to hear all this. It's so brilliant. I think somebody else mentioned that before. I feel like it's like at least 10 years down the road for our Canadian use, but
Well, we'll see. We've got somebody from the city on. You never know. Let's do a
but
GoFundMe page.
yeah, for sure. I want to ask if I'm understanding this correctly, because I think I understand the technology hears the sound and twins it, like duplicates it, to send it back to nullify it. Is that right?
No. What happens is you do a 3D model of the space. So you have an idea of how sound goes in and out. What are the refractions? What are the reflections? What's interfering with it? So you have a model, and then you can model when sound comes in and what you need to create the anti-noise to stop that coming in. So a lot of the development work is done in advance and is an ongoing process, which is why George says we have some at the edge, which is we were doing at Lure Live, and some we go back and do updated analysis, probably through NVIDIA, who we're connected with, and then come back down again.
Okay.
So that it's much faster to deal with it. You're still reacting. You still have speakers, microphones in the panels to receive the signal to generate the noise, but a lot of it is basically pre-primed, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, it's like cooking a cake. You've got the recipe first, and then you're just putting the ingredients in, rather than starting from scratch every millisecond when the sound comes in. You're saying, well, we're well down the track. We know what it's likely to do, and therefore we've done that before. We know what it's likely to do. And therefore, when the noise comes in, we've got a pretty good chance of historically solving all that, and that should solve a lot of it. But there will be some edge stuff that will need to be adjusted as you go, and that's part of the development. Does
So
that
like,
answer?
even I think what you're speaking to is, even if we have aggressive honking and there's a ton of ricochet off the glass in the other condos that are
Yeah.
and that sort of environment, the software learns that and picks it up and can erase it, I guess.
Funny enough, that's something which the New South Wales government, which is the state we're in, is running trials right at the moment. They've just set up 2 trials for sound cameras, basically cameras that record the sound and take a picture of number plates. They're looking at exactly that problem. Drivers being very noisy and hoon drivers being
Hoons,
very
yeah. You guys call them hoons.
doing that, and trying to stop that. Down the track, obviously, they're looking to find them or regulate what the rules are, because they're not allowed to go over 90 decibels anyway. But just more, there's a couple of hot spots. There's one around Sydney and one down in Wollongong, the city further south, where they've put in these sound cameras to monitor, so they would identify the sound that a certain decibel, take a snapshot of the camera with recording the sound result and the car, try and change behavior.
Yeah, those are the sound view cameras. You're probably connected with Ruben, or they are with
I
the
have no
sound view.
idea. I mean, they've only been announced them about a couple of weeks ago. So
Yeah,
we had a chat to the New South Wales EPA, any Environmental Protection Agency, last week, talking about what they're doing.
yeah.
Because
So
conceptually, if you can do that, we could then have a solution to stop it.
yeah, well, that's what, so for everybody on the call, this is where we have Ruben Peckham from SoundView cameras, that are the noise cameras that are in operation in New York City. He is going to be in Toronto on December 9th. During the day, he's doing a meeting for city officials. All of our city councilors have been invited. The noise team has been invited. And then in the evening from 6:30 to 7:30, there will be a public meeting. Also at City Hall, and Ruben will be presenting on those noise cameras, because we want to bring those also to Toronto, or at least educate people on what are the options for sound mitigation, for sound enforcement, that isn't necessarily more bodies. And I think that's something that we're coming to understand, is that there will never be enough bodies to get all of the modified vehicles or the loud vehicles off of our roads. And Leo and his team, I mean the noise team, it must be just like whack-a-mole, like you just keep on going, and then there's one bad operator, and then maybe they are fine, and then there's another one. Like, it's just a constant job. And so that's, we're looking at area sound level monitoring, this type of technology, sound level cameras. There's just a lot of great technology that's coming that I think can not only save resources in the sense, and maybe some frustration. Leo, you mentioned your team, trying to take a sound level measurement 20 meters from a speaker, and they're in the middle of the throng of all of these people. And, that must have been just so uncomfortable, like there's things that I think technology can do better now. So I do want to recognize it's 10 to the hour. So any other questions here for Paul? Hey, Harris. Yeah, absolutely.
What's available now?
Good one.
Nothing.
Yeah, so people want relief. People want relief. And I was
We
curious.
understand that.
Yeah, I was curious actually if you are looking at both commercial and residential, because there's some people that might say that neighbor is they're never going to invest in the however many tens of thousands of dollars this equipment might be, but maybe that person is willing to do that for their home. So I'm assuming you're looking at a couple of different markets.
It's both. I mean, it's a progression, and it's probably because of the nature it will be commercial first. Things like the battery energy. Australia have a very high level scientific research groups. They call them Centre for Research Centres, CRCs. I'm not sure if it was the Centre for Research Groups, which they're just putting in a new CRC called Minerals to Megawatts, which is being run out of Queensland University of Technology, which we are a small part of, looking at how you transition to net zero, and because we have a very high mining industry, how mining industry can be involved in that net transition zero. And we're looking at the battery energy storage component, because part of the net zero is you've got to store the excess electricity from daylight or wind or wave eventually, and then put it back. And they're putting in, the Australian government is rolling out 420 community battery storage units throughout the country over the next few years to provide local storage and our local access to communities to off-peak storage from net zero. But they're noisy, and they can't be put. Currently, they can't be put closer between 50 and 100 meters from a house. And you think, well, oh, that's not too bad. Till that's what, couple, football field away, right? You think of urban density, how many places are you going to get a football field away from every house?
No, it's impossible.
It's not possible. So
No.
if you can reduce the noise, then you can put them closer, and that helps everyone's community. So yes, the short answer is business first, but down the track, the real people that really need it are the individuals. It's just a question of how you get there.
Excellent. Okay. Well, this has been great. We had 14 people register, and we had I usually have a 50 to 60% attendance rate, and so we hit that. So this is awesome. And I'm just going to finish off by just doing a couple things here. And so Paul, what is the best way for people to contact you? That's that form on your website, noizend.com?
I think that's the best way. We've got a survey form. Also, you can just email us at info@noizend with a Z.
Yep. Good.
Funny enough, when we came up with the name, we put it into ChatGPT and said, "What's a good name for anti-noise things?" And George liked that one, so that's what we chose.
There we go.
So we could get the domain name first, obviously, because it's sort of reverse backward. You've got to get your ducks in a line.
I know. I was very happy to get
started with AI. There you are.
There you go. Excellent. Excellent. Well, I'm just going to share my screen. We didn't really get to the portion that I was looking to talk about as with the Good Neighbor guide and the night economy. So, but I am having a webinar on Saturday, and that will be to basically prep people to talk to the Economic and Community Development Committee on November 26th. And they are going to be talking about the update regarding the night economy and the external working groups and all of that. And so I would like people to share their noise story with the city, because nothing changes unless they understand the health impacts of noise and how it's impacting people physically and mentally. And I had a chat with Carlton Grant once, and he said, and I was like, "Oh, Carlton, I'm poking at the city." And he said, "Ingrid, it's okay. It's a safe space. Cities learn from citizen engagement." And so that's basically what No More Noise wants to do, is to equip people to speak up at city committees and educate you and equip you so that you can do that, and that you can get your point across, and so that the city can understand what the health impacts for you are, and then also how we can mitigate it, and we can work together to do that. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen here, and there's a couple QR codes. So we love data. And so I do have an amplified sound survey right now, which asks what nights of the week you get impacted by amplified sound. How does it impact you? Does it impact your sleep? If so, how much? Those types of things. So it's both the location questions, frequency, and your health impacts. So we've got a few people. I think we've got about 14 responses so far. So I'm looking for a few more. So that QR code will take you there. And then, as I say, the Good Neighbor Guide will be presented at ECDC on November 26th. We do have a meetup on Saturday, and so there's a QR code where you can register for that meeting. And we'll chat a bit more about what's happening with the night economy and zoning regulations, and what operators need to do in order to apply for their permits. And there's some things that I think that they could do a little bit more of. So we'll talk about that. And also the city is going to be holding a town hall in 2025 regarding the night economy. So nothing changes unless people show up, and unless people share their noise story. So I think with that, we are pretty much good to go. Is there any final comments? Anything that people want to share, or anything like that? I know I do want to thank you, Paul, for reaching out. You were the person that sent that first email, and like I said, nothing happens unless somebody does something. So you certainly have you started this.
Problem. It's not a one person. It's everyone's problem.
Yes.
It's just growing everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think we're at a good time where the technology allows us to tackle what is really a very complex issue and make some strides to make it quieter, which is
yeah. You know,
benefit
people
everyone.
people want to have a good time. I do, but I also know that I want to have a good sleep. And for me, it's another noise source. I'm not around amplified sound and music and bars and that kind of stuff. But for some people, it's hugely impactful. So I do believe that there is a way that we can find harmony for
Yeah.
both. So, Leo, I just really do want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know you've had a long day, but I really appreciate the collaboration that we have with the Noise team and MLS.
I think we're both working on the same side here. Okay,
Awesome.
right?
That's great.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, I think on that really great note, Barbara, I saw your note that said thank you. So thank you. And how do you just casually say goodbye in Australia? Is it like a see ya? Is it like a what is it?
I think goodbye sounds pretty good to me.
All right. Well, then we'll say that. So goodbye,
We'll see you
everyone.
later.
We'll see you later, mate. And you have all again. And now I'm going to do something weird. So, anyways, I'm going to stop
Don't
now,
do
and
it.
I'm just going to say I wish you a very good night and a good sleep. And thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
All righty. Take
Bye.
care. Bye bye.